Hey everyone, welcome to another episode here in my channel, Calvin Wazoo. Richard here. Today I want to talk about my favorite guitarists. Now, and I'm going to pick five of my favorite guitarists. Now, I'm not saying that these are the five greatest guitar players, although they are in a way. Um, but there are a lot of great guitar players that could be in this very short list that I'm not including because of the criteria I set up for this list. And here's the criteria, all right? So, number one, obviously, they need to be very skilled in their craft. Uh, so, they've got to be awesome guitar players, but also skilled in their craft in terms of music writing and even collaborations with others. It may include their skills in composition, um, but they need to be highly skilled, definitely, as a guitar player. And their technique, second variable, technique needs to be varied. There's a lot of really great guitar players. For example, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm not including him in this list because his technique is pretty narrow in terms of the style of blues guitar that he plays. So we're talking the technique needs to be a little more expansive, like even someone like Peter Green, an enormously influential and great guitar player. But again, his style was pretty narrow in terms of his technique within the blues. So there wasn't a lot of variance there, at least in my opinion. Then the third variable is that their material is largely original, both maybe in terms of the style that they used being original and unique, but also with the songs that they wrote, the riffs that they created, very original. This is why maybe I'm not going to include someone like Jimmy Page. Especially with some of the early Led Zeppelin material. Certainly, he was adding his own flavor to a lot of the songs, but the songs were not original. He didn't write them. He just created his own style around blues classics that were already out there. And then the last one, influential, that this guitar player influenced a lot of people across the board, not necessarily only in rock and roll, but they were very influential, both in terms of their guitar playing style and also in their songwriting. All right, so those are the criteria. Now, this group that I have here for my five, in my view, favorite guitar players is within the realm of rock and roll. So I'm not necessarily including any jazz guitarists. Some of these are can be considered blues guitarists, but I've also kind of like eliminated a lot of them. Or even folk music guitarists, because that's certainly an amazing skill to have. So focused on rock and roll. And so the first one is probably going to come as no surprise to you, and that's going to be Frank Zappa. And I'm going to show you a couple items here. I recently talked about this recording, Imaginary Diseases, because there's just some really great guitar solos in here. But then again, also all the music in here is composed by Frank Zappa. He was certainly a tremendous influence on a lot of other guitar players. He really is just searing on like Bend to Kansas City in A minor. Farther Oblivion is just truly amazing. and DC Boogie. I mean, these are all great songs on here, but I did talk about this in an earlier video that was focused on the drummer, Jim Gordon. There's this one here, the 3 CD set of Halloween 1977 in the Palladium. There are, again, some just amazing guitar solos on this. Just on disc one, the guitar solo on The Torture Never Stops is mind-blowing. The guitar solo on City of Tiny Lights is mind-blowing, which incidentally, he wrote that song and constructed it so that it could have a guitar solo. So, I mean, he had the guitar solo in mind and then kind of like wrote the song around it. And then there's Conehead, which it's not the song Coneheads, all right? It's just Conehead. And again, just a really amazing guitar solo. But the really interesting one is on the second CD, second disc, and that's Wild Love, okay? So Wild Love is just this kind of standard concert song that Zappa did. It's got a very, very, very rhythmic, fast rhythm and complex time changes. Very cool song, but it's 30 minutes long on this CD. And in fact, this was released as all the shows from 1977 from Halloween at the Palladium were released in this huge box set. It's unfortunately, while the format is outstanding for, in terms of audiophile quality, it's on a memory stick, and it's just not a very handy medium for a lot of people. But they did release this on the 3 CD. And so with Wild Love, there are several guitar solos that are just mind-blowing. The first guitar solo is with Frank Zappa, and it's very short, but just like his technique and his style is like, boom, it's right there. And then there's a vibraphone solo, and then there's a heavy boogie jam that starts after that, and then comes this second solo. Now, most of what I've read about the show seems to imply that Zappa was playing, he was playing solos that were on here. However, Adrian Belew toured with him, and Zappa liked having other guitar players because Zappa admitted, I cannot play and sing at the same time. So when he would be singing in a song that still had some guitar part, he needed a skilled guitar player to carry that out. And Adrian Belew definitely was there. And Adrian Belew definitely does some short solos on many different songs, both that in concert songs and even in some studio takes, which are, with Zappa, you can never tell because it could be a studio album, but portions of a song could be taken from a live show that happened and even taken from a different song. Anyway, I think the second solo in Wild Love is Adrian Belew playing. It might still be Frank, but it just kind of fits with what I hear most of the time when I'm listening to Adrian Belew play, whether it was with King Crimson or when he was touring with Bowie, or in his solo material. But it might still be Zappa. That's the second solo. Then there's a third solo, which I believe, let me describe it. It's very heavy on glissando, which is a technique. It's kind of like slide guitar. It's when you slide from one note up to another or down to another. So there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of echo going on and some little syncopation and with the picking that is almost like the technique that they use with pizzicato that more often is associated, let's say, with a violin player plucking strings. And then So there's a lot of that going on there. But you see, I think that's kind of an homage to Syd Barrett. We're talking about, all right, 1977, right? And this is about the time when a lot of Zappa's guitar playing and solos started using this type of technique in playing. But Syd Barrett was doing this in 1967, 1968. So that's why I kind of, think that uh, Zappa is kind of playing an homage here. Now, does that mean I think Zappa is copying Syd Barrett and his technique? No, no, not at all, not at all. But he's definitely, all musicians get influenced by the people that they admire or who they've listened to. Certainly, other even more modern musicians, they may not acknowledge it, but the influences are there. And it's Frank playing for sure. I just think in kind of a way it's an homage to Syd Barrett. And the other thing about that solo is it starts to build up, and you keep kind of expecting it to end, the solo to end, and then the song, get back into Wild Love. But it doesn't. It just starts to shift and change direction again, which was also something that Syd Barrett used to do a lot. It would be difficult for the other members of the band at time to kind of rein him in so that they could move on with the song. Well, after that solo, there is a fourth one, a little bit shorter towards the very end of the song. Remember, this is a 30-minute song. And definitely, to me, it's an homage to Hendrix. It has a very strong Hendrix style in terms of the fuzz and distortion that is going on in the solo. And it's, while I haven't seen any specific documentation of Zappa being influenced, let's say, by Syd Barrett, he was certainly, there are well documented cases that he had tremendous admiration and perhaps even a little bit of envy toward Jimi Hendrix. There is one story, in some of the biographies that talks about how when the Mothers were in New York City and they were doing these shows at one of the little theaters there, Jimi Hendrix showed up and Frank, said, "Hey, come on up and jam." And Hendrix got up there with the Mothers and started jamming. And it is reported that Zappa walked off the stage into the auditorium in like the front row and sat down and watched. And if you know very much or anything a little bit about Frank Zappa, is he was a big time control nut, perhaps even a control freak. All his music is orchestrated. There's very little freedom in the playing. It might sound like it, but no, everything is written down pretty much note by note. And so he was a conductor quite a bit with his musicians. And so he was in control. And here was a time where he abdicated that control to someone that he obviously had huge respect for. And he just let him go up there and play with his band. Very, very telling moment, about that. And that's what I hear in that fourth solo of Wild Love. Definitely that homage to Hendrix. Now, I've mentioned him. My second pick for my favorite guitarists is, I just noticed how my camera does that thing, and it's like I'm not running anything else on my laptop, and it just does that. I don't know why. Maybe I need to use a different camera. Anyway, yeah, Syd Barrett. So obviously, Syd Barrett is the main influence and person who was driving virtually everything on Pink Floyd's debut, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Even with the title, being a reference to literature that Sid Barrett read as a child. And most of the credits, I mean, you look at the songs on here. Astronomy Domini is Barrett. Lucifer Sam is Barrett. Matilda Mother is Barrett. Power Talk is Barrett, Waters, Wright, and Mason. Even Interstellar Overdrive is credited as Barrett, Waters, Wright, and Mason. And there's definitely some concepts that they put in there, but that's the one I want to talk about the most here. But looking at these other songs, there's a wide variety. Again, going to my criteria, his technique is varied. His technique and the style of playing varies quite a bit on this album, and certainly he was skilled. You you have to appreciate what he was doing at this time. We're talking 1966 and 67 and 68. All right, before they even got in the studio to do this. By the time they got into the studio to start recording this, Barrett was already starting to disintegrate, so to speak. But prior to that, I mean, we're talking a very, very influential guitar player. People, greats from all other bands would come to see him play because he was so phenomenal, including members of the Beatles, Eric Clapton. There were many who would show up at some of the famous shows and listen to Sid play. And Interstellar Overdrive kind of became their trademark jam. And again, it's the same thing that I was kind of talking about with that Frank Zappa solo. Just really spacey sound. A lot of the glissando and the non-conforming tuning that happens a lot with many of these guitar players, and also just as I said, the influence and the other songs. It shows the variety. You'll want to know more about Interstellar Overdrive because the version that's on this is actually an edited version from when they were recording it in the Abbey Road studios. So one of the places that you can find fuller versions would be in this unofficial release that came out recently. This one, Pink Floyd, London, 1966-67. This is when they were beginning to record in Abbey Road Studios. There's two songs. It's an EP, and on side A is Interstellar Overdrive at 16 minutes 46 seconds, and Interstellar Overdrive on the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Hell, it doesn't say on here on my copy. But I'm thinking it's around 11 minutes, something like that. And then on side B is Nick's Boogie, which is credited to Nick Mason. But again, Barrett's guitar playing is just incredible. The sounds that he gets out of his guitar. And what he would do is, he would buy a guitar and then he would rebuild the couplers, or he would install some type of device in between the guitar and the amp so that he could do different things with it. Just amazing. He used for his glissando in the sliding on the strings, he used a lighter, like a Zippo lighter. So we're talking something like similar like with slide guitar, but it's just not quite the same thing, because then you're adding all this other distortion and feedback and reverberation while you're doing all these things. It's just really, really incredible. So Sid Barrett, you want to check out those albums. Oh, and also, again, to listen to another version of Interstellar Overdrive. is this one, which is also an unofficial, the Pink Floyd in the Beach Woods, the early year, 1965 to 67. So this is takes a lot of some of the items that they did record as singles that didn't show up for a long time, or until much later, maybe on Relics. But songs like Lucy Lee. There's a cover of "I'm a King Bee." Pink Floyd, when they first got together and were jamming in the clubs, they were an R&B band. That's what they did. They did R&B covers. And Barrett's two primary guitar influences were Bo Diddley and then Steve Cropper. Steve Cropper is not necessarily a name, a lot of people know, but he was part of Booker T and the MGs. So he was like a studio band for Stax Records, and they did some stuff on their own. But he very much attempted to mimic and expand on Steve Cropper's technique. But anyway, there's also another version here of Interstellar Overdrive, as well as some other songs that, again, like I said, did not show up on the first two albums that Pink Floyd released, even though they were recording these songs during these many sessions, such as See Emily Play, Scream Thy Last Scream, Vegetable Man, chilling songs. But again, we're seeing the varied skill of Syd Barrett, not just as a guitar player, but as a songwriter. All right, moving on to number 3. Hey, I'm going to get around to him for sure. It's going to be Jimi Hendrix. And I'm just picking Electric Ladyland for my example. But certainly we're talking about somebody who is not only, highly skilled and applied a varied technique. He was also largely original, did a few covers, but he was still pretty original even in his presentation of traditional blues. And of course, hugely influential in the music world. Even when he did the cover of All Along the Watchtower, Bob Dylan is reported to have said that he did it better than I did. He played it the way it ought to be played. And then you've got hits like Foxy Lady, which is from the debut, just amazing. He's using a little bit of glissandi going on in there, and the finger picking. These were skills that were developed before Eddie Van Halen, started really doing this. Even Frank Zappa was doing that style of hammering strings with a finger, was developing that before. Eddie Van Halen, that became his signature. And he's certainly a great guitar player. But you see, I would disqualify him because I don't see him as being that innovative. I'll probably get hit with a ton of bad comments over that, huh? Anyway, then you got like Third Rock from the Sun, just this amazing sweeping, from a technical, he's not doing a whole lot of picking during the song, but just the sounds again that he can get out of his guitar. Then, of course, the classic Voodoo Child, A Slight Return. Amazing song, just an amazing song. Many of these songs being found on that album. So my choices started to get a little more difficult for numbers 4 and 5, in part because names that kept coming to mind were guitar players who were really good and considered, major guitar gods in the world. But again, there were certain criteria I was using, such as, how varied was their technique, and also how influential they might have been. So I didn't necessarily select them. But number 4, I'm going with Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits. This is kind of funny because I saw on a comment on I think it was another YouTube video, where somebody left this comment. I can't believe that the Dire Straits is being inducted into the Hall of Fame. I mean, what did they ever do? Well, they didn't do anything fantastic. They didn't do anything innovative. Well, pretty good stuff here. The albums I picked for this, and I have more, but Love Over Gold is, and this is the a MoFi original master, is just an incredible song well, not song, but album, in that it also shows the variety of technique that Knopfler uses. I mean, Telegraph Road is such a sweeping, beautiful story, and the way the guitar is being used in key points of the song is just, it's mesmerizing, mind blowing. So it's a very awesome composition altogether. And then you've got Industrial Disease, with the syncopation, and again the subtle picks that it's not like any crazy wild and magnificent picking that you might get from someone like Eric Clapton during Crossroads, but it's very subtle. And then we go to another one I think that really exemplifies Knopfler's skills is this one, here. When we've got the Brother in Arms, another MoFi recording. The variety of here, of course, there's, it was a hit, but it's still a great song, Money for Nothing. And then it goes into The Walk of Life, the shift and both the timbre and the style, and it's spot on and still really amazing. And then it goes into Your Latest Trick. My favorite song on this one is The Man's Too Strong. An amazing story, of a man who's being tried as a war criminal, and he's talking about the leader that was telling him to do these things, and how he was just so utterly held under this person's influence. The man's too strong. And then when that is repeated in the song, an acoustic guitar nonetheless, the riff is just, it's short, but so intense. And it just leaves you with this, it's like you just got blasted with a weapon, a stun gun, or hell, even a bazooka. It is just, it's just, just really, really amazing. And then the last one for number 5, I chose Pete Townsend, of The Who. And again, he meets all this criteria, both in terms of being skilled. He's technically varied. And a lot of, The Who did some covers, but nonetheless, Townsend is very original in his work. And he was also very influential. On Who's Next, I mean, Baba O'Reilly, is well, they're all. This is a classic album. There's just no doubt about it. There are a few albums out there where I say they are the epitome of rock and roll. They are a perfect album from first track all the way to the last track on side B. And this is one of them. This is really, truly one of them. And but again, you start off with like on side 2 where you've got the song Getting in Tune, and then Going Mobile, and then you go into Behind Blue Eyes, and then bam, finishing off with Won't Get Fooled Again. The variety of style is just amazing. And then that's a studio album. His skill is still amazing in live venues. So The Who Live at Leeds, which, My Generation, Magic Bus, are Townsend compositions, and just really, really incredible, with the variety, both in terms of the live music. So Light It Leads. It's a classic one. They have a newer release out that I think is this is the original format of one album, but I think there's one that's like a 3 album release now because during that show they performed Tommy, I believe, in its entirety. So that's something in there. Anyway, those are my 5 favorite guitarists for the time being. My 5 favorite, and I think probably they're among the 5 best guitar players in all of rock and roll. They're going to show up in a list of top 20 or top 25, no matter who the author is. I think. Um, although sometimes you see Frank Zappa go down lower, but I just don't understand. He is such an amazing player, composer, an influencer in the music world. That's why I'm his number one. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to leave a comment, you can do so down in the down under. Please like and subscribe to my channel. And always remember, enjoy your music.